Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it's my pleasure to have Gregory Wendt with us. Gregory is a certified financial planner, social entrepreneur, and director at Stakeholders Capital. Sustainable development has been integral to Gregory's life since the late 1980s. He's dedicated his gifts to such areas as regenerative economic development, finance, business innovation, and responsible investing ever since. Now his focus is incorporating biomimicry into investing and economic development. Gregory, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Stephan.
So let's start off by talking about what it is that inspires you in like what kind of epiphanies or awakenings have you had that have been transformational for you?
Ever since I was a child, I've always been curious about, okay, this is what the story is that you're telling me in school or on TV or, in whatever. But why? There's something more. Always curious about what the additional perspective is. What is the next view? And Carl Sagan, you might say, was one of my first gurus because of the idea of, what is, him really rigorously discussing the nature of the cosmos and how do stars form and what's our relationship to that. All those things I was extremely interested in when I was a child. And my father took me to see Carl Sagan lecture at Caltech in Pasadena. And that's when I think the that we're all star stuff really landed. And I think that perspective of recognizing that there's something deeper in us than our current story and our current perception in our civilization. There's always something to discover about a different way of seeing things that might inform now, right? Because I guess I never felt satisfied enough with just the rationalization or the reductionist explanation of things, like that's the answer and go back to sleep. There's always that curious pioneer spirit, I guess you might say.
Yeah. So Carl Sagan started it off for you, and I love that concept of we're all made of star stuff or stardust. I had a kind of innovation or a corollary to that given to me not long ago, and that is we're all made of God dust because we're all made of God.
Yeah. Well, that really was for me to go deeper on your question. That was really the real epiphany, the real wake up. When I was 14, my parents split up, as happened in the 70s and 80s, and I was 14. And what that time was of, seeing the world a little bit outside of the mind of the child, in the early teens. But what happened in that shift of perception of what is this family about and what is my role and whatever, or what does this mean, made me see the challenge of watching something that I thought was stable and unchanging fall apart. And then I had a conscious recognition that there were two pathways for me. One, to let it kind of take me down a path of trauma, or to actually lean into this and grow from it. So I made a conscious choice. I'm going to grow from this. And my mother also was I think she kind of got on her own spiritual journey, you might say. She started going to different kinds of meetings, and she, one of her first boyfriends was from EST. He was involved with that group EST, which is now kind of landmark forum kind of thinking, and Alcoholics Anonymous doing, oh my God, alcohol, you can do things to actually change your consciousness and your perspective with reality, where prior to that, the recognition that we could actually affect the way we think and change the fabric of reality in our own experience I was not aware of that. So that kind of opened up the consciousness level. And then my mom started taking yoga and going to yoga. And we lived in a suburb of Los Angeles called Palos Verdes, and just a little bit of small town vibe. And going to the local yoga studio was unexpected at that time. But she went with her yoga teacher to see a spiritual teacher named Swami Muktananda, who came and I wasn't particularly interested at the time, but I was curious about these ideas. But when I got his book from the library and read the idea that everything is consciousness, it's very, it's the same thought that everything is God stuff. And I'm like, oh, that gives another foundation of the reality that makes sense, in the sense that it's the unified field that Einstein was indicating, and that kind of larger order of intelligence that I always intuited in the Carl Sagan material, because he always had that kind of lofty perspective, even if he didn't talk about it directly. And it kind of gave some rigor and some form to a cosmology that actually included my own interior experience woven in with the physicality of the cosmos. And that kind of changed my worldview. It did change my worldview dramatically, and it changed my life, because I started meditating at that time when I was 16.
That's very early to start meditating for most Westerners.
Yeah, I guess it just became I was like, oh, I finally found something that actually makes sense to me. And when I was reading that same book where I was learning, I remember in many of the wisdom traditions, whether it's of any faith, whether it's Christian or Islam and Sufism, or esoteric Buddhism or Zen, or in the Eastern tradition of India, there's a kind of potency that happens when a master has achieved a fully integrated state of wisdom, of enlightenment, you might say, and then the ability to have those mirror neurons with a student, and that kind of awakens that perception capacity inside of us. But it's transmitted in many different ways, through the words, or through the presence, or the teachings, or something like that. So when I was reading his book, I kind of had this all expansive unified experience of everything is consciousness. And it just made me so intrigued that I just, as soon as I could, I went down to the meditation center, started going to their programs during high school. And then I ended up moving into that very meditation center down here in Santa Monica to go to college. So it became my dorm, you might say, when I was at UCLA.
Wow. And how
Yeah.
much time do you meditate per day? And what are some of the most recent big insights or epiphanies that you've gotten from meditating?
The idea of doing, the idea of off the mat, off the yoga seat, from the very first days of going to the meditation ashram. The ashram is the term for a meditation center that's residential, but not necessarily monastic, where all of us have to be in a monastic order, but people that were not monks, and monks were living in that, and many of us went to jobs and such. We all had some occupation in our jobs and our lives. I went to school. Also, we ran a meditation center. We had a vegetarian restaurant, and many of us, as part of our living there, would do 2 or 3 hours a day of some kind of work. So the implicit philosophy that was so engaging, that grabbed me from day one, was, if we really experience that everything is consciousness, and that we are that consciousness, and the consciousness that energy of intelligence that created the cosmos also created us, and there's no really any way to differentiate, in the same way that a leaf cannot distinguish itself from the tree, then the radical result is that every moment of every day and every thought is a creation of that consciousness. It's just a matter of recognizing the nature of what you're actually experiencing, rather than to achieve it. It's about self-recognition. So the depth of the tradition is called the doctrine of self-recognition. That really just ringed so true for me. It just grabbed my awareness. And then the idea of the practice of continuous meditation as the goal. And then I read a great book called The Practice of the Presence of God, from a guy named Brother Lawrence, who he wrote his letters in his journal, that was the book, from the 14th century, about his days in a monastery where he's always practicing this experience. And there's also a book called The Way of a Pilgrim by a Russian mystic that also really touched me at that time, about continuous dipping my awareness and my attention into the pool of cosmic consciousness, regardless of the activity. And that became the kind of the implicit teaching, because one of the jobs I was assigned to do when I was at the ashram was to wake up and chop onions for the rest of the day at 4 a.m. But that happened to be the meditation time. So instead of meditating, my meditation was to stand in the kitchen and chop onions for an hour to 2 hours every morning, and then have breakfast and go off to school. So that became my practice. Is if I'm meditating, I'm actually practicing for the rest of my day, right? If I'm sitting in a mat. So that's kind of the radical high bar that I've held for myself. And that's the radical teaching of full integration. In the Zen tradition, there's the idea of what they call the 10 ox herding things. They're like little images of the Buddha going up to the mountain and coming down. And the last one, he's in the marketplace, but he's just free and fully conscious. And that's the goal, is in the world. And the idea of even in the world but not of it, and all of that kind of stuff is a duality that when you really see that everything is consciousness, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to get away from. God is all of this. And even the idea of God, this is almost an agnostic recognition that I wouldn't say rejects, but transcends any concept that there is a separate God and these ideas of different deities. But then from that perspective, each of these kinds of forms that are inspirations for our meditation and our practice become just different expressions of ourselves, and they're different mirrors of our own awareness and different expressions of those different aspects of the divine consciousness, the divine cosmos. And then going back to the Carl Sagan, it just makes sense that there's some vast intelligence that created the DNA strands. I mean, to even think that happened through random events can be challenged from a very reductionist perspective, because if you look at random chemical reactions, something like 7 billion years of reactions needs to happen in order for DNA to appear in randomness. So then we don't have enough time on planet Earth for DNA to appear in that way. So there's got to be some other explanation. There's some other intelligence, whether DNA came in on a rock from, all those things mean that whatever our reductionist narrative is about what's going on, there's always something more. And I always just take it back to, it's an expression of the intelligence of the cosmos that is recognized through even the faith of science, but often not practiced. How about that?
So do you
think that's kind of my thoughts on all of that. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. So what do you think of this concept that we're living in a simulation, that this whole thing is an illusion? And I know there are some names applied to this illusion, like Maya or samsara. Mm-hmm. I'm curious to hear your take on that.
Well, the recognition that this is an illusion, right, is a very, it goes back to, at least in the Eastern tradition in India, it goes back to the Vedas that were an oral teaching before they were written down 5,000 years ago. And the concept of Brahma, the all consciousness, the unified field, Einstein would possibly call it. And then that this experience that we're having in physicality and in energetic realities beyond the physical is an illusion and a product of Maya. So some of those teachings would say that's a product of our own ignorance to not see the God and project this idea of world onto it. And the teaching is sometimes, well, if you're in a room made of everything of gold and you see a lamp and a chair and an apple, but it's all made of gold, do you see gold or you just see these objects? It's just a matter of how you tune your perception and what you're aware of. So that's the teaching there. But then if we're going to go to the radical implication that everything is consciousness, then even the illusion itself is made of consciousness. And then if we just sit for a moment and think about what I just said, okay, there's this thing that created this simulation called illusion, in this field of information and awareness called the universe. And that experience is a product, a simulation of what is that fabric made. In the same way, my mind goes to, well, when you're having a dream, you're in this whole imaginary world that is an illusion, but it's all created in your own mind, in your own interior awareness. Yet then that means we have to challenge our idea that we are separate from the cosmos. But then if we are separate from the cosmos, then what created this? And is not this thing, this body, mind, part of that projection and that simulation? And if so, then isn't my body, mind, made of that very same fabric that the simulation is made for? So then, therefore, if we're going to go to that level, right, you're following?
Mm-hmm.
That then I am watching this simulation of my body, and this is an illusion, but I'm watching my hand. So then, who is the one that knows that?
Yeah.
Is
Well,
that an illusion, or am I? Oh, so the teachings in the yoga tradition are stripping away all philosophical ideas and constructs and beliefs. Just eliminate all that for a moment and just observe your own interior experience along the lines we're talking about. You woke up this morning, right, Stephan?
yes.
You had you remember dreaming this morning, right? You had a dream, maybe, a little something. And then before that, you were in deep sleep, and maybe in the middle of the night, you got up and go to the toilet. Before that, you were sleeping, and you remember all that. So in the yoga tradition, we're asked, well, just identify with your awareness who is watching all that and who's keeping notes. That's the knower, right? So then, then the only meditation practice is to meditate on that, which requires no belief, no thought, no formula, no nothing, but to just continue to bring our attention back to that. And the Zen meditation tradition, sometimes one of the practices in Zen is sit quietly and just be aware of the sensation of your breath on the upper lip. And inevitably, your mind does what your mind does in the same way that the heart beats, the mind moves. So whenever your mind moves somewhere, the only practice is to bring the attention back to here. In the same way, when our mind goes off and we get caught back up in the illusion again, just bring the mind back to the knower. That's the meditation.
Yep.
And that's the recognition, and that's also the result.
This
we have
is
to
a really
look at
cool concept. It just occurred to me that something that Jason Campbell, who makes meditation music and sells a lot of it on Amazon, said that if you just simply have the question in your mind, especially if your mind is very busy, or you're trying to quiet it and meditate, if you just have the question in your mind, I wonder what my next thought will be, that tends to really quiet the mind. It's really, it's a great hack. It's a great hack. So
it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Because that's one of the things that reminds me of, like, pay attention to the space between the thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Or the initial step, maybe pay attention to the space between your breaths, because the recognition in that teaching is that something happens where your mind just pauses for a micro moment. And if you kind of can grab onto that in the same way, those become three little tools, or two little handles to get to this infinite. And then once that muscle starts building, you can hold on to that tool regardless of what's going on in your mind or the circumstances around you. And that's the process, and that's the goal. And that's that radical non-duality, that if everything is made of the fabric of the cosmic intelligence, and therefore my body, mind is, then right here I can tap into the cosmic intelligence that is, 45 billion light years away when the Big Bang happened. Something like, it's the same. It's right here because it's presence. And that's also the essence of all the wisdom traditions, is that you are that which made the cosmos, and you are the cosmos. And that's there's another thing that comes to heart, and this is that by just closing our eyes into and tuning into the field of the interior, like I'm looking at the ocean right now, but if I just imagine I close my eyes and then the interior of me goes into what is underneath the surface of that ocean, that there's just a continuum in reality that goes to the stars and everything, then there's that one field from which the projection of matter becomes evident. And in that way, this idea that everything is a simulation is true. But the question still becomes, who is the simulator, and what agency and what role does our awareness have in that? And if we continue to believe that I am separate from everything in the universe, well, then what is the nature of who I am is the question that is often left out in these questions. What am I if I am separate from everything? And to inquire into the nature of who is that knower, and to just use that's the essence of the meditation tradition, because that's where, when the kingdom of God is within you, or know thyself, it's all pointing toward that inner self actualization.
Yeah, I remember doing an exercise at a mastermind, like a men's brotherhood kind of thing, that not metal, which is how we both know each other. It was a different mastermind run by Neil Strauss, the author of The Game and The Truth. Anyway, so this was an intensive many years ago, probably a decade ago, and I remember we were being yelled at by everybody else, and we were supposed to be on stage, yes, one of us at a time. Everybody got a turn, and everybody in the audience is yelling, "Who are you? Who are you?" And then, but who are you? Like, whatever you said, their job was to just say, but really, who are you? Because no answer would be sufficient, because we would, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm all these different roles. This is my my business or my employment that I do. This is my job. This is my career. It's not relevant to who you are as a soul. And at the time, I didn't get it. I hadn't had my big awakening yet. I don't think I had by that time, the first one where I was in India. So I didn't know what to make of this. So every answer was wrong, and I couldn't just. Of course, now in retrospect, it all made sense. Like that exercise was very powerful to extract out the essence of who I am, or at least to get me thinking about or meditating on that afterwards. Like, yeah, who am I? I'm not my personality. Because and now I can see it very clearly. I've seen past lives and so forth, so I can see that my personality was very different in these different past lives. So, and my how I looked completely different, etc. So, who am I? Well, I'm a pure and beautiful soul, but I don't know how more to articulate it. What do you think?
Well, I was almost thinking how curious those 2 points in time, you might say, on the that there are many different timelines, and that's one of the kind of psychedelic revelations that happens through these kinds of meta experiences, that there's not necessarily a linear sequence of the lifetimes that you might say you've had, or the memories even in this life. They kind of rest in this cloud of consciousness, and when we have a near death experience, or these epiphanies of meditation, you kind of take a step back and see the whole of you and all your memories and sensations and selves, you might say, because even in this lifetime we have many different selves that we have been. And even Joe Dispenza talks about it in this book, breaking the habit of being yourself. But if you do that in sequence, then how many selves have you been? So we don't even need the concept of a past life to have this thought process. So I was wondering, the kind of epiphany of the moment, like now, and the imagining that those earlier selves are informed. Like I read an autobiographical an account of a farmer in Australia that started having all these cosmic experiences and being guided by nature, spirits, and cosmic beings through his life and in other realms and other dimensions. And he writes all about it. And at one point, the teacher and the spirit teacher said, "Go back to your self," because he saw himself as a farmer years ago, and he went back to himself and whatever he did. But then at that time was when he was a farmer and spirit beings came to him to inspire him to think about nature, and he turned his farm to organic, to consider the spirits of nature and all the life around him, and to honor that larger circle of life. And in that later moment, he realized that spirit that came to him in that earlier moment was his own self from a future, perspective, outside of time. And that was just psychedelic, to just consider that. And I was sitting with a mentor when he was taking me through some guided meditations, and I was just having my mind absolutely blown. And he guided me in some way like that. And he said, "Yeah, and your future self is doing this to you right now." And I'm like, wow, it just has these endless openings and awakenings to it, to inform our day-to-day life, and also how we interpret is as you know, and how we interpret and relate to reality is ever changing. And that, I think that's how we do change the fabric of reality. And that inspires my day-to-day activities, you might say, that we can, through our own awareness, with a benevolent intention, change our lives and change the world and lives around us. But I don't know if it's really necessarily change in the sense that we are coming from outside to change. There's something emergent, kind of like metamorphosis, or the idea that you probably heard about of an imaginal cell. In the process that a caterpillar goes through to go into the cocoon and then becomes a amorphous goo, and then all the cells of the caterpillar start flipping into becoming butterfly expression. So those are called imaginal cells, which initially are attacked by the immune system of the caterpillar until there's some shift. And that shift is a state change to recognize the coherence of that new order. It's not an external organism. It's a change. It just wasn't recognized from an earlier personality. And I think that to be kind to ourselves as we go through these changes can be informed by the way nature works, the way that life all around us has that innate intelligence of collective metamorphosis on a consciousness level.
Something that you said just kind of reminded me of a short story from 2009. It's called "The Egg," written by Andy Weir. Do you know this story?
My memory goes, "Oh yeah, that," but I don't have any recollection of what it was. So please continue.
So here's kind of the gist of it. Basically, you died. This is a short story, right? So it's all fictional. You died, and you're greeted by God, and you are asking lots of questions about, how are my kids and my wife? Are they okay? Like, what's happening? And the idea of it is you are going to reincarnate as another person on the planet. And because you're asking all these questions of God, and he's basically saying, well, you were all of them. You were everybody. It's not until that you've been absolutely everybody that you complete your journey here on Earth, and you can escape the life death, rebirth cycle.
Cool.
Yeah. So here's a little excerpt from it, from the story. How many times have I been reincarnated then? Oh, lots and lots, and in lots of different lives. This time around, you'll be a Chinese peasant girl in 540 AD. Wait, what? You stammered. You're sending me back in time? Well, I guess technically, time as you know it only exists in your universe. Things are different from where I come from. Where you come from, you said? Oh, sure, I explained. I come from somewhere else, and there are others like me. I know you'll want to know what it's like there, but honestly, you wouldn't understand. Oh, you said, a little let down. But wait, if I get reincarnated to other places in time, I could have interacted with myself at some point. Sure, happens all the time. And with both lives only aware of their own lifespan, you don't even know it's happening. So what's the point of it all? Seriously, I asked. Seriously? You're asking me for the meaning of life? Isn't that a little stereotypical? Well, I guess it's a reasonable question, you persisted. I looked you in the eye. The meaning of life, the reason I made this whole universe, is for you to mature. You mean mankind? You want us to mature? No, just you. I made this whole universe for you. With each new life, you grow and mature and become a larger and greater intellect. Just me? What about everyone else? There is no one else, I said. In this universe, there's just you and me. You stared blankly at me, but all the people on Earth, all you, different incarnations of you. So it goes on, but it's a great story. And there is some profound truth in it. There are many universes, and we are from my understanding. So I have to preface this by saying this is my understanding of things. I'm not, saying that this is the truth with a capital T, because I don't have that kind of power. But what I understand of this is you are the pilot of your own universe as the observer. And there are lots and lots and lots of slices or shards of the multiverse, each of us piloting one aspect of it, one shard of it, one universe. So what we believe, what we expect is, and the level of faith and certainty we have, it affects everything, not just what happens locally, but what happens globally. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, having multiple timelines, multiple universes, having as the observer the ability to control the destiny of everything and everybody in that universe, because you're the observer. You collapse all infinite potentiality down into what you observe and what you expect, right? So your characterizations of people, collapse them down from their infinite possibilities down to what you expect. Like, oh, this person is always a pain in my neck. Oh, look at that. They're a pain in my neck yet again. So, what's your take on all this?
Well, I'm glad that we had a conversation with myself about this. I was just reminded of Ramana Maharshi, who's that person that when he was 15, he just laid down and asked himself, who am I? Over and over and over and over again. And kind of came to the same recognition, and ended up on a mountain that I did visit years ago called Arunachala in South India. And he's, just basically spent the rest of his life sitting there in meditation. And two things that come to mind of the many things that he said. One is, there are no others. Which is more or less the same story. And he said that he gave teachings and talked for those who did not understand the silence. And whenever I feel the sense of that, it ripples through my consciousness, not unlike a pebble in a pond, even though that was almost 20 years ago. But now it's eternal, right? It's right here. So in response to the kind of question before us, when we look at the karma report, also known as the news,
CNN, critical or
yeah, right.
crisis news network, yes.
Right. All of the above and all the different points of view and perspectives, and holding that as just different aspects of myself gives us that alone is a gift for our time, you might say, to just have a little bit of compassion that we're just all different aspects of the human experience trying to get our needs met.
Mm-hmm.
And to recognize the patterns that we've put into motion on this planet are reaching the edge of their efficacy. And the gratitude I feel is that we have these tools of consciousness that you and I have been talking about all along to realize that we're not victims of these patterns. And that's one of the things I think that's often curious about when people are saying that we're somehow a simulation, as if we're being programmed by bugs and from another, dimension, and that we're somehow victims of this cosmic reality, rather than really to see the root of our own awareness as having full agency. And
like
when
we're being punked.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But solar punk is actually a really cool thing, in my, to just kind of have that radical possibility of expression. And looking at the different teachings I've encountered, or people that are gurus or awakened, or like Ramana Maharshi, that man that just sat in that one place the rest of his life, and the world was informed by him. I mean, here we are today. Him sitting on a mountain in silence changed my life, and changes maybe this conversation, because of the possibility that was not necessarily considered before of the radical freedom of consciousness and the authorship and sovereignty we have. So if we look at the puzzle of the world situation and that which we see in the karma report, we might see that inside of the construct of time, space as our mind and our scientism and our reductionist perspective, and a very egoic mind point of view, and not necessarily saying it's superior or inferior to have an ego point of view, but to just operate from that limited perspective has its challenges. And that's what we can see are a lot of the problems on planet Earth. So by holding that perhaps the way out of this box has instructions, but they're written outside the box. So that means we need to look at things from an interior, seeing the all outside of time perspective, to come back into our human form and the human foibles and the human karma report, and be that consciousness that holds the possibilities that seem impossible from another point of view. And perhaps that's the only way we've ever evolved as a human family. And perhaps that's our moment. Those of you who have not seen the movie 2001, but those of you who have, will recognize this, the Black Obelisk.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps to look into the depths of our own soul is that moment of evolution that can happen yet again. How many eons in the future, looking at this moment on this planet, we have the capacity to harness, to be that character in egg story for us now, and to just recognize perhaps that's all that's ever gone on here, if there's only me here. So then to just sit back a moment and look at the perspective and how we can be more present and loving and compassionate, for lack of a better word, but then to hold perspectives that seem outside of the realm of possibility, but to feel the emergence, just like learning from our teachers, a caterpillar and a butterfly, you know, the parable that said the caterpillar thought life was over until it became a butterfly, or they just don't recognize each other. But that's what we are now going through as a human species, and we have to allow that that is actually possible in our worldview. And many of us are still unaware that that is available to us. So perhaps this is an opportunity for us to reconsider what is actually available to us in the realm of our own consciousness, optimizing ourselves in a way. But then to rethink what does that phrase mean actually gives us the pathway.
Yeah. Wow, it's pretty heady stuff, but it's also important to contemplate your own existence, your mortality and immortality, the nature of consciousness, what makes you one, what makes you separate. All that is pretty deep stuff. And if you never take the time to contemplate this stuff, you're just busy with daily life, and you never take the time to meditate or pray or any of that, you're missing out on the whole point, I think.
Well, absolutely. And I think it's important to look at what you said. Pretty heady stuff. You know, I remember I've read a lot of philosophy, and I always thought, well, I should read Heidegger's book, you know, Being in Time, right? Yet I personally didn't find a lot of value in what I read in that, because it was separating, at least the part of the book that I read, separating me from the concept and making it an intellectual, logical formula game. But the implicit premise that you and I are talking about, this is not intellectualizations, that we're not two philosophers arguing about different points of view and logic and theories of the nature of the universe. We are having a direct experience in our lives and sharing with each other the insights that inform this experience and enrich it, and enrich our relationships with others. So I feel that if someone is feeling a little overwhelmed by these ideas, or a little bit like, oh, wow, that was just over my head, or like you said, heady, or just a philosophical, you know, masturbation discussion, perhaps all too true from one point of view. But if we sit down and really think about everything that you and I said and reflect on the possibility of it and the implications in our own experience, for some of us, it will require rewiring everything we actually thought was so. But that's the intention of this kind of discussion, is to rewire, to inquire deeper. Because the beautiful gift of that question of what you were asked on stage, you may not have needed to do anything else, is who am I? Who are you? Because every moment you get to that, there's a whole other universe of who you are that you didn't even recognize. And that's the ever-growing edge that's rich and makes this moment by moment experience incredibly blissful, actually, even though we have moments of fear and pain, but that it creates, it's a game, right?
It is a game.
Like I say, the movie The Matrix is a documentary to some people.
Yeah, I agree.
In a manner that is not, you can't take it literally, but there's the framework of how he saw, but then, you know, there's all these other layers of it that they're still victims, and that's not really what I'm going at, but you get the gist of the framework of the perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you know the book, The Game of Life and How to Play It? It's by Florence Scovel Shinn. That's like
one of my favorite
she was like
books
Neo
ever.
from the Matrix, and this is written in the 1920s. It was so ahead of its time, that book, and her just incredible stuff. I'd never heard of her. It's one of those things where it just showed up in my YouTube suggested videos one day, or maybe it was on the homepage of YouTube. I believe in the things are presented to us in the right time and in the right way, and that was something that I was supposed to listen to. So when I saw that in my YouTube list, I'm like, okay, I feel pulled to it, and it was incredible. The audio, well, I'll drop the link to that YouTube video and
awesome,
into
do.
the yeah,
It's one
it'll
of the
be in
best
the show
books ever.
notes. And
Oh, great.
actually the Audible version isn't as good as the free version on YouTube of the someone
Really?
else reading it. Yeah, it was the Master Key Society on their channel. They had somebody read
Cool.
it.
I'm going to check that out. I've
Yeah,
loved that book
it's
and
so
given
good.
it to a number of people. And there's something that you pointed about her that I know each of us and everybody that is either listening or not listening to this conversation has in us, that spark of full radical self-awareness and full radical self-empowerment in a cosmic universe. In whatever language or form you use, every one of the faiths and belief systems actually has this somewhere embedded in it as a key or a code of discovering ourselves, to just recognize the greatness of ourselves. Every one of the originators of the great faiths, we're already this, but then we are that too. And I love about the 20s and 30s, there was a lot of this going on in America and the world. The Theosophical Society and the Vedanta Society and the Hermetic traditions and the Rosicrucians, and the revelatory Christian faiths like what Florence was talking about, or the Foursquare Church. A lot of these were really trying to bring this awareness to light. And I think we're in that kind of axial age again at that time. But maybe this whole era, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term axial age. It was around the era of when a lot of the great religions were created years ago. And I read an essay that just said that maybe this is something that will also inform eons to come by us wrestling with these cognitive challenges that have led us to the human problems that we're having right now, the biosphere and all the other things that you can get on the Karma Report, require as a gift, because there's no way out of this without changing our consciousness. So therefore, we put ourselves into that, painted ourselves into that corner, but the only way to go is to go in and transform. And I think in some of the communities that you and I share of our friends in common, there's some recognition of this, but it's still kind of in a narrative about me instead of about we, and about the way that the collective can change the collective experience for the benefit of the all. And that's something that I find very promising about this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that makes sense,
It's not just promising. It's incredible what's happening and what's unfolding is miraculous. And I'm so excited and just grateful for what's coming. It's not like the end of the world, the doom and gloom of dystopian sci-fi movies. It's an incredible new earth that we are about to experience, and I'm very, very grateful.
I want to create a closing thought for us. If I know we're wrapping up soon, right?
Yeah.
I'm just remembering when that first teacher that got me into meditation, Swami Muktananda, he would give interviews all over the world. And at that time, I think there was like several hundred meditation centers that were sprouted up around the world from the tradition that he brought from India. He took these kind of what were formerly secret teachings for only the initiates and just kind of gave them to people. And it was also an embracing of all the different faiths, not just the tradition that he was from, and talk about all the different teachers around the world. But his essential message was, And if we just take the term, if you don't believe in the term God, put the word greatness or cosmic intelligence or light, whatever eases you and inspires you. But he said, meditate on yourself, honor yourself. Your God dwells within you as you.
Hmm. And have you heard the voice of God? Have you heard or seen a manifestation of God in your kind of transcendental or transformational experiences, maybe meditating, or I don't know if you've had a near-death experience or anything like that?
Yes. I don't know if we have time to share, but I remember having an experience where when I watched and read about near-death experiences, it happened in a meditation yoga class when I was, at a yoga class. But I had such an experience of seeing the entire world as luminous consciousness after going through the sequence of experiences that felt like a near-death experience. And when I saw those shows about that or the read about it, it was the same kinds of things people said that they saw when they went to the other side. And friends of mine who became spirit teachers because of what they learned from the other side, and they were told to come back to their bodies to carry and teach, it's there's to even say that there's any other way to experience this, and that is reality. This is reality that we're having a human experience in. There's just different aspects of it, right? Different aspects of experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience of death is just an expanded life. And the idea of having a body and then not having a body are just transition phases of the one real life that we have. And then the question that I've always helped me to navigate the embodied experience is to imagine myself maybe the moments or days after I pass, or to imagine myself the days before I'm born, and to just look at the unified perspective of the day before and the day after, but as one place outside of time, looking at now. And how would that guide whatever it is that I'm facing or thinking about in the moment? And then make that the moment's perspective to help me kind of shift out of my mind patterns or the frustration or whatever I'm navigating as my meditation, to go back to your earlier question. Is, and then if I'm sitting in silence, that is also the exercise. And if I'm sitting on the toilet or in traffic, frustrated with, or at a concert or whatever, it's still the meditation that I need to look at. Because that's the exercise. How is it that I can more readily expand into the reality that my God dwells within me as me? How does that relate to now?
Most people, when they think of now, they think of their five senses pulling in information and just being really aware of what those sensations and stimuli are. But what if instead the present moment is only when you go inward? Learn this from a video of a channeling of Sam the Illusionist. I forget which beings were speaking through him, but the present moment that we think of as the present moment, just our five senses picking up information and just being really in that moment, we're actually experiencing the past. That is in the past. What we're doing right now, thinking it's in the moment, is in the past. It's an echo. So if this is in the past, then how do you get to the present you shut off all your five senses, and then you go inward, and now you're in the present moment. That's pretty cool.
That's rich. That's really rich.
Time is an illusion.
I am an illusion, yet I am real. I am real and I'm an illusion at the same time. That's the recognition of, you know, it's all about recognizing, yeah, this is real. I'm having a real, I know this is real, but it's my interpretation of it that may be in question. I'm just so steeped in that. I don't even know what I was going to say next. I kind of lost my.
Well, I got to share something with you.
My mind just went blank. Yeah, please, you can take it away.
So I interviewed earlier this week Dr. Eben Alexander. He's the author of the #1 New York Times bestselling book, Proof of Heaven. He had a near-death experience, which he wrote about in the book, and he went from just being a very pragmatic neurosurgeon to being deeply spiritual and writing other books after as well. He mentioned something called a shared death experience. I'd never heard of this before. But he said when you kind of ride along someone else's near-death experience or their actual death experience, and that happens a lot, apparently.
Well, you know,
seems to me that's what happened with you when you were in that meditation.
Well, the first experience that I had, to answer your very first question, my twin brother died before we came out of the womb. And I sometimes, if not always now, recognize that was that shared death experience. The way you said that is exactly what I've felt is what actually happened. Because you know those stories of twins that were separated at birth, but they both like, you know, cheeseburgers with, you know, with peanut butter on them or something like that. But he was on the other side. And that gave me this perspective outside of time that has always informed, well, what am I here on earth for? Right. You know, and that's where the story you heard me say, happened, you know, with my childhood and the coming to the guru and meditation. It just like, oh, I finally found something that made sense from my experience. And it wasn't, it never, all these things that you heard me share never felt like I was adopting a belief, but it just gave me a thought process that helped me understand what I had experienced. And to have a language for it and some common community around these experiences that we've had is so valuable that we have this kind of conversation, because many of us, if not all of us, are in touch with all of this inside of ourselves. We just haven't cultivated those psychic muscles. It's not even mental. It's because this process of self-awareness is developing the capacity for where we direct our attention, and the attention projection, the creation of the universe that happens inside of our own being, because we are the very process that creates the universe inside of mind, inside of Stephan, inside of Greg, inside of Allison, inside of you who are watching or listening to this. It's all the same process happening on a fractal level. The cosmic process is happening simultaneously. There's not only one subject. There's one awareness that becomes all subjects, and there's as many subjects as we can imagine. How many humans are there? There's as many subjects, and we have 40 trillion cells, so there's 40 trillion or 3 trillion cells having 40 trillion things that they do every second, but they're all subjects. There's as many eyes as there are what you can imagine, yet the possibility of radical omnicentricity, that every center is the center of the universe and itself at the same time, or every being, you know, is an expression of the cosmos. I mean, it's expressed in you know, the Tantra, where the goddess, you know, those Buddhist tankas with all those different beings, she has 72 million forms in that story. but she's aware of herself taking on as many forms as you can imagine, and not perturbed in the slightest by the differentiation and the duality that is created therein, because she's always aware of her original nature in the middle of that. In the same way that we go through our lives and we're lovers on one moment and bankers the next, and traffic drivers or chefs or servants or kings, what have you, it's all the me. And I don't ever get disturbed that I am me, even though I play all these roles. And that's the kind of concept that also helps us to grasp the possibility of this awareness that lives as all of us. And it's just time for us as humanity to have that perspective inform our day-to-day policies. I read a book about this that was really interesting. All the things that we've talked about, for most of us that are steeped in the Western traditions and the Western philosophical and religious frameworks, this sounds a little out there, right? And a little Buddhist in the sense of like, oh, meditation in the present, watching everything as mind. Yet this is not foreign to the Western tradition. It just has been forgotten. And I've always been wondering about that all these years of studying philosophy and history of religion. And I read a book called In the Dark Places of Wisdom by a man named Peter Kingsley that talked about Plato's teacher, Parmenides, who actually was one that had this gift, and he was one of many. That was a whole tradition at that time of people that would go into the meditation, into the depths, into the dark, and explore these realms of consciousness. And he wrote a poem about going to meet Persephone on the other side of death, coming back to this day-to-day life, having held the gifts and the memories and the knowledge of meeting the goddess of death. And that was a symbolic representation of his awakening. And then many of those people who were in that tradition would inform policy decisions or society, like the Oracle of Delphi apparently was one of those women and people that went to the other side to bring it into the day-to-day life of society. And I feel this is so important in this time as well for all of us in our jobs and business, not to separate the spiritual on a Sunday to going to the business or being on in a crypto trading meeting. We have to look at how does all of it live at once, and how do we show up fully in our every moment with this kind of gift for humanity and for ourselves, are the kinds of questions that you've evoked today.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful, powerful stuff. And just to piggyback on what you said, and then we'll close out the episode. If you're always seeking a Delphi, Oracle of Delphi, to get the answers from God, but you're going through an intermediary, whether it's a psychic, a medium, a guru, or anybody, or even something, then you are you're giving your power away, and you're also might sound a little extreme, but from a Kabbalistic perspective, Jewish mysticism perspective, it's idol worship. So if the only thing you get out of this whole conversation is to go direct and get the information and answers and guidance you seek from within instead of from without, from others, or from something, or system, some system, I think that alone is worth this hour that you just listened to.
Well, in some ways, like everything I talk about, intellectual property in my work and what ideas, and I say everything that I learned from somebody else. You can't learn math without going to a math teacher. You could, but then the book that was written that has the math system. So I think in the same way, what we talked about isn't that making you or me the teacher for someone who's experiencing this podcast or listening or watching it. Yet we're saying the experience is real. And the experience is tangibly available to each and every one of us, which means you don't need to come to me or you, Stephan, or any other person to have that experience. Maybe it helps to have a person like us, not that we're the teachers, but that we're like Florence Scovel Shinn saying it's real, it's possible. You're not crazy. You're not imagining things.
Mm-hmm.
And to point to that reality and to always direct us back to that reality is the purpose of these traditions when properly interpreted. In the same spirit that you and I are doing this, it's about we're just naming it and sharing our experience and inviting others to have their own.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this has
Yeah.
been
Awesome.
really wonderful. And Gregory, you're a light in the world. And thank you for taking the time to have this this important conversation. I'm grateful for you. And if our listener or viewer wants to connect with you, where should they go?
Well, LinkedIn is always easier, Gregory Wendt, or my website, gregwendt.com, GREGWENDT, is an easy place to find me and my socials.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you, listener. Now, make it a great week. Go out there and do something extraordinary. And we'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.